Welcome to Good Morning Hospitality, your one-stop shop for the latest news, noteworthy trends, and thought-provoking discussions across the industry. From hotels and short-term rentals to all things travel and hospitality, you'll find each episode equips you with the information that you need to start your week. Join us on Good Morning Hospitality every Monday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
How we doing?
Fantastic. How are you?
Great. It's been forever since we've seen you, Brandy. It's like, I don't know.
I know. I felt so much FOMO. I'm not going to lie. I was in the middle of our leadership quarterly wrap-up meeting, so I could not make the impromptu recording and major
Good.
FOMO.
You just didn't prioritize it, but that's okay.
Yeah, as the COO of the company, I can't leave our leadership meeting to go record a podcast. So
yeah,
we see where your allegiances lie.
Big short-term rental business podcast. Big short. Not that we're not great. We do love.
Not that I don't love you guys.
Yeah, we love each other. It's all great. Just you know, I get it. We all have other things. You know, Michael you barely got to make it BT Dubs. So, you know, that shows where your priorities lie. You're 50-50.
But I did.
Brandy was it's true. It's a good point.
Hey,
yeah.
Actions speak louder than words, Will.
Good point. Good point. I have no choice but to show up full time. So, you know, this is legit my full-time job outside of everything else. So it makes sense. Hey, I'm excited though, because the one time that we do get to record, I give my Sojo mug. Because Joy listens to the podcast and she heard that my building lost the mug and she sent me a new one. So thank you.
Finally
Joy.
got it.
Finally. It was great to have Max on last week. Did you guys what was a big thing for you from the conversation with Max? I think he was well versed. He really just brought in a lot of good, sharp answers. So I'm curious to know from your guys' perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he knows his product inside and out. I'm also just incredibly jealous of his fundraising journey. He's like, yeah, I talked to a couple people and we raised millions of dollars. I was like, oh, it's that all? That's it?
Yeah. For me, I couldn't be further from a true nuts and bolts operations person. And so those people always amaze me. And Max certainly is, heads down, figures out all the little details that I would probably leave behind.
Yeah, the attention to detail is pretty good. It's pretty good. I love it. I love getting to talk to Max. I got to interview him early last year, I think right after Sojo launched, due to being good friends with Joy, and it was just so cool to see from that conversation to where they are today. It's like, wow, really, really impressive, and good team, good entrepreneur. So yeah, good stuff. I'm glad that we got to have him on finally. But I'm also excited for this episode. Brandy, one, we did miss you, yes, on the impromptu Jamie Lane episode. Now that you are caught up and we're on the recording together, what are your thoughts from the conversation? I'm seeing, we recorded it on Wednesday. I'm seeing a day Thursday night and Friday, even as we're recording this. I'm going to admit that we're not actually live for all of our listeners right now. On Friday, seeing it's now becoming a main thing on socials, like TikToks and Instagram Reels, and all these other people are talking about it. Even though we heard about it on Monday, Tuesday. What are your thoughts now after that conversation?
Yeah, so I thought it was funny because in our leadership Slack chat, one of my coworkers posted a Newsweek article about the collapse, that whole thing, and I was like, actually, listen to our podcast. But I mean, yeah, I think for me first, it's just the sensationalism of this stuff is really irritating. I think that when we're in this industry, we're so lost in the sauce of all of this. And it seems so obvious that data seems just sketchy at best. You would kind of think about it, but you realize to the vast majority of people that, that's just kind of fact. They looked at that and they were like, oh my God, it is imploding and the Airbnb apocalypse and all this stuff. And how could you question those numbers? It's not like anybody has ever made stuff up on the internet before. And So I think, Michael, you said it right. It had like all of the components of like a sensational headline. And so for me, I mean, we talk about this trend of like things softening, what the supply looks like, what the demand looks like, and we've been talking about that for a while. So that's not really news to us. So then when you see a story like this come out, you're like, that's not the full picture. But most people aren't in the STR industry. Most people just know that what Airbnb is, and it's kind of been villainized in a way. And this was also another version of villainizing it. So, I mean, Jamie always does such a great job of explaining the data. And I think, we know that it's not as scary. I think it was funny. One of you was saying that you're talking to someone who was like, even if my revenue was 40% down, like I'm still making more than a long-term lease, bought another place. Like if you're a good operator in those markets that he mentioned, you know what's up. Like, I mean, we see softening in our demand and our ADRs, but it's certainly not down 50%. That would be, I might not be on the podcast if that was the case.
It's a function of the world we live in too, how something that's false can catch fire and spread, and then everybody can kind of just believe it, right? Just see it as truth. And then you come in over the top with truth and facts that are real, and that message doesn't get out there quite as broad.
No, it's not as sexy. It's not as fun. No. It's not going to get like the clicks, and people don't want to know that everything is just kind of not as great as it was last year. They want to know like something like apocalyptical is happening. That's the catchy stuff.
Well, Jamie's reply on the Twitter thread right now, as I'm looking at it, has 219,000 views on it. My reply to him originally, after without posting the episode that we did, has 38,000 views. And then when I post the episode a day later onto that thread after we recorded, it gets 500 views maybe on Twitter. So like you said, the virality piece is really funny. To see all right, the truth comes out and not a lot of people pay attention versus this garbage, stat. For all of our listeners, I'm going to play a quick clip. I think what Michael and Jamie were saying in this clip is super important. So if you didn't listen to that episode, one, we'll put in the show notes, or you can just go back one episode. But two, this is all you really need to know from this whole virality issue. So here you go.
It's something we've talked about on the show a lot, but this tweet had all the makings of virality. It had splashy big corporation plus demise plus year over year halving revenue in major markets where people have invested a lot. That's what caught my eye the most. But in reality, instead of 50%, 30%, 20%, we're really looking more at 10, 5, 4%.
Yeah. A great example is Sevierville, Tennessee, Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge. There has been a lot of supply. This year, supply was up 15%. If you look at supply relative to 2019, and we're up 80% in terms of listings on Airbnb and Vrbo. That is supply growth. But it's a market that's also seen really significant increases in revenue. They had really strong pricing power in 2021 and 2022. And now we're coming off of that, and we're seeing declines in both occupancy and ADRs, but nowhere near cuts of 50% in terms of revenue. On average, we're seeing 10%. You look at professional operators, it's 15 to 20%. They maybe got a bit more of a boost with their revenue management strategies during 2021 and 2022, but it's definitely not the 47% drop that was reported.
So you heard it from the data nerd himself. It's not true. I've been going on a rampage today on TikTok and Instagram with all these stories that are highlighting the false chart, and I'm like, no. But again, probably not making a lot of traction on that, but whatever.
If it makes you feel better.
Just doing the Lord's work, just trying to go out there and tell the people what's right and plug the show, of course.
I wonder how many people listed their house for sale expecting their market to just crash and burn soon. So I'm very curious, this week in some of those markets, how many vacation rental homes
for sales
have a for sale sign out front.
All you real estate agents better be tuning in. Get ready. Get those listings Get those listings live, make that money. There's been a couple other news stories coming out that we've gotten to chat about, and I wouldn't even call them news stories, but trending topics. And Brandy, I kind of want your take to jump in. One of our favorite topics, fraud and all the other stuff on OTAs. It's not just about Airbnb. There's other OTAs to talk about. So we'd love to hear. Yeah, go for it.
Happy to complain. No. No, so last weekend, or kind of maybe like the Monday, we noticed one of our revenue agents was like, there have been a massive influx of fraudulent reservations in from booking.com for our New Orleans properties, like 177 in the span of like 3 or 4 days. So obviously booking.com is kind of known for having more fraud, say, than like Airbnb because of their payments and stuff like that. But 177 in like concentrated in one of our markets, and it was like everything that was available within a 2-day window. And so the cards weren't going through. Stripe, like our payment processor, was like catching that and they were declining. But you have to notify the guest and they have like a window of, up to 24 hours to replace their card. And so you can't cancel it. Right. And so we were lucky enough that we have a building that isn't live yet. So we just moved all of those reservations into that inactive building to free up the calendar until we could cancel them. But that's massive. It was like just under $100,000 worth of reservations. So like, not only does that screw up our revenue data coming in before we catch it, but I mean, that's just it's so much fraud. And so we thought originally, we're like, is someone targeting just us in New Orleans? Like, why would they do it on booking.com instead of our direct site? Like, we were just like, this doesn't make any sense. And like, who's mad at us just in New Orleans? And then we realized that it was also a couple of our buildings in Miami, and our revenue manager, Shane, shout out Shane, found this article from the beginning of June, from another hospitality publication, saying that a hotel agency or hotel group was issuing a warning that there was this massive spike in fraudulent bookings for hotels that are on the preferred partner program at booking.com. There was some sort of promotion that Booking was running that was somehow just like, I don't know, made it easier to make these fraudulent bookings, something of that nature. And booking.com was aware of this. So that article came out June 5th. And we're talking now the end of June. We're getting all of these. And just trying to get a hold and like get a response from booking.com. Like, can you help us mass cancel these reservations? Like, any of that. And they're like, oh, it's with our fraud team. It's like, it's with your fraud. You've known about this. Booking.com issued a statement to the hotel groups. So they know what's going on. And whatever program that was like, this was happening. Look, I understand you try something and it goes horribly wrong in a way that you didn't anticipate. I have like patience for that. And, but this is like an entire month where you were still allowing it to go on, and then offering no help and just saying this with our fraud team. It's still, quote, with the fraud team. And it's just so infuriating. And so their thing is like, you should be enrolled in booking payments or payments by booking. And we were, but that also messes with your cash flow. So we were kind of like playing around with it. And yes, that does prevent a lot of those kind of things from happening. But that's just an outrageous amount of fraud to have, like, and just to think that that's acceptable. And, there needs to be better security around that. And so we talked to our good friends at AutoHost for kind of like their take, and they couldn't join us, unfortunately, but Ella sent me like their statement on it, and just saying how, these incidents shake up our reliability and our sense of security on the OTAs. And obviously all these OTAs are major sources of revenue. So we have to work together, and it's not like you can just cut them out, but it doesn't seem like there is enough being done on the fraud side of things to prevent this from happening in the first place. And, Ella's point also, for like, as an operator, you have to have things in place like AutoHost, that, to prevent that. But that's only after, like, that's kind of a reactionary way of dealing it, and making sure they don't get into your building, right? It's like, why can they even get through? And if we know they're fraudulent, why do I have to wait 24 hours before I can remove them from the tape chart? So that's my rant.
Michael, you're muted.
Thank you. So I don't understand the benefit for anybody to do something like this, like whatever hack or thing has gone on. So whoever you are, whatever kind of weird stuff you're playing with, stop. It's not cool.
Please stop.
They're definitely listening to this podcast right now.
It's not one of your competitors, right? Like I don't think the industry is sinking to those lows. If it is, we'll have words and expose
some stern
you,
words.
Expose you. But it also goes to show how slowly big companies move, right? This is a major thing with how many
ours was over. It was 177 a couple days ago, so it could be closer to 200 now, and that's just us, a small operator.
So
and this,
200 bookings at $200 a month or $200 ADR or whatever. You're talking 40, 50 grand of fraudulent bookings tied up that you aren't able to drive additional revenue because those are locked in. I mean, that has substantial impacts to companies. I know if it was a startup that had that issue, the problem would be fixed within days, not weeks or months. So it's wild to me that all the resources of a major organization can't be levied to fix problems that directly impact the bottom line of people. If it's a feature that shows you as a house instead of an apartment or something, it's not really impacting this or that. Like, I get it. But if it's directly impacting your customer's bottom line, you better fix it fast. So
exactly. And I sent them like the live document of all of the bookings that we were adding to, like all of the reservation data, all of that. I was like, can you just go in and cancel all of these for us immediately? And that was never said as like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll do at least that. And I mean, luckily we had someone that caught that. What if we only caught a couple of them? We didn't realize like the severity of the problem. And then all of a sudden there was 50, 60, 70 grand. It's not. So
is it the same names, the same emails? What?
So chunks of it were, it would be like one, the same guest would have like 7 bookings, 4 bookings, something like that, all in a row, all the same date. And it was all of our New Orleans properties are Preferred Plus hotels. And so it's like, it seemed more like that, but then we do have some in Miami and they were also getting that. So it's just, and we switched everything back to the payments by booking for those properties just to try to mitigate that. But it's just a wild response. Like we've had this conversation all the time with Airbnb about how it doesn't feel like a partnership. It's like we're kind of at the mercy of whatever they decide to do, and that's how it feels like this. This is not when we mess up as an it's a conspiracy. No.
Do you think Booking's doing it on purpose to drive more people into the payments by booking?
Maybe. Wouldn't that be funny? Well, so that's the thing is like, when we mess up as an operator, we are impacted by reviews, potential loss of future revenue. We have to refund the guest, all of that kind of stuff. Like we have to be accountable to our mistakes. And then when the OTA makes a mistake, it's like, whoops, so sorry. Like, we'll try better. And it's like, what is the financial compensation, or at the very least, like assistance, So it really makes you feel like it's very one-sided, and they'll be like, we're partners. It's like, are we partners? Because we're your supplier and we have to take the brunt of all of the stuff that you do wrong.
Yeah. There's so much that goes into it, and I think maybe a couple years ago, this whole because I'm a big fan of Book Direct. Obviously, we were all at the Book Direct show in Miami last year, and this is something I'm a big fan of and I believe in. But there was a lot of quote unquote issues within OTAs and Book Direct and all this sort of stuff that I was like, okay, like they're all things that are workaround. Like they're easily feasible, or there's a solution, or there's some type of thing you can do. But I would say recently, especially with all this, the I wouldn't count the data thing maybe as much, but the booking fraud, and then what we're about to talk about next, with platforms changing the way that they have structured certain features within our tech stacks, within our tech ecosystem, that do cause this is actually some pretty major issues. And like you said, Brandy, I love that the focus of partnership and how it doesn't feel that way right now, because at the end of the day, you are 100% right. We provide the supply, they bring the demand, and hopefully it's a fair give and take, right? They get their commission, whatever their fee structure is, and we get our guests and the data, and hopefully a returning guest that will book with us direct, leave a 5-star review, satisfy owners, all the other stuff. But it doesn't seem like that right now, and I would say it's time for, like, this is I don't know, not like a revolution type thing, but this is a major issue that isn't just impacting one or two operators. This is impacting every operator we talk to, everyone that goes to Verma, everyone that goes to IMN, everyone that goes to STR Wealth, whatever conference you want to go to. So it just seems like I don't know, maybe there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a solution, right? And part of me just can't stand at that booking. You can just say like, oh,
well, the solution is educating travelers that you can go look at the window shop on the platforms, and then go direct. But that's
but it takes too much time. That's not instant gratification.
And you lose a bit of the securities if there is no nationally recognized vacation rental brand. Like if you asked any of our friends, they'd never heard of any companies in our space. So they do offer, there is a benefit. There is a traveler benefit to booking on one of the platforms, because the platforms will back the traveler. If you book direct and it's a fly-by-night operation, then you're screwed. So like, as much as we want to bash the OTAs, they do serve a good purpose.
They do.
For sure.
When they do it right.
Well, I think this just also speaks to like diversification, again, making sure that your distribution channel mix is, kind of evenly distributed, or you're not relying too much on any one source. And I was talking to David and Gotti at Guestival, a couple months ago, and I forget the actual number mix he said, but he was like that you don't want to have 100% direct bookings. There's like a sweet spot, because if there's any sort of like change in an algorithm and all of a sudden you're, Google's kind of controlling that side of it. So you want to make sure that across all of your distribution channels that you aren't too reliant on someone, so that if anyone changes anything, you can kind of pivot to your other channels.
Well, speaking of pivot, and go ahead, Michael.
Not yet. One quick shout out. We talk about some issues with OTAs on this show a good bit. We don't often talk about Vrbo. So to what extent? I mean, I think they do a great job of knowing their customers on both sides, doubling down on them. Yes, they might be slow to roll out tech, but as is every big organization. But I think they do a great job with account management, and the show's not sponsored by them, if anyone knows. If they want it to be, then we're open to it. Come on, we're open for that. But it is something we don't bring up on the show much. So there are folks doing good things and doing the right things, and not saying that Airbnb and Booking are doing the wrong things, but sometimes it doesn't feel like putting the customer, in this case, the supply first, happens often.
Yeah. I will say I was impressed with Tim Rizzolio, not only because he was on the podcast. I think if I saw this without knowing him first, his presence at the vacation rental, summit that was in New York or Chicago or something like that not too long ago. His response and the way he presents and represents the flag of Vrbo at Expedia is actually, I'm really a big fan of what he's doing and how he's representing it. So I will give that props. And hopefully, Tim, if you're listening, Vrbo would be a great partner for this podcast.
Yeah, I have to say, because Vrbo isn't like geared towards urban operators, really. Like we still get some bookings from Vrbo, but that would be my request. Come back and help us urban operators be on your platform.
Yeah. All right. Now, speaking of pivot and transitions and OTAs, not as Michael just said, we're not trying to bash OTAs at all. Swear to God. But this last topic that we have is around the conversation of features being removed from Airbnb's platform in September 30th of 2013. They're removing their email alias, where basically I saw this in a post from Dennis Casiola. Talking about I saw him basically straight up tag Track and TravelNet saying, "Hey, we need to act fast on this because it's going to really impact not just them but operators everywhere, even individual hosts, even if they have property management software." So good on TravelNet and Track one for being a great sponsor of the show, but showing like how they immediately took action into this.
Listening
issue,
to your
right?
customer, knowing their
Yes.
needs and reacting and assuring them that you're on top of it. And
100%.
customers don't expect things to change overnight, but they do want to be heard, and they do want their input to be taken into action. So yeah, major props to TravelNet.
Yeah. I would love to hear, especially Brandy, with you being such a big operator in our industry, from this feature, being removed when you saw it, what went through your head. And yeah, let me kind of peek in under the hood a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think I definitely had perhaps an emotional knee-jerk reaction just to seeing the post. Um, and I think it's just because we've had constantly these like changes that are happening to us. I mean, we just talked about booking, but to Airbnb, where it's like this is making things harder for operators. Like nothing really seems to be helping. And then from our perspective, we kind of already, this won't be a big issue for us, which is great. But I can see how it's a huge issue for a lot of other operators. And it's great that Track is kind of like, has noticed that and flagged that and is going to try to, make sure that there's a solution by the time it happens. I just, it's Airbnb in particular keeps trying to make changes that on the surface appear to help hosts, but it's really not. And it's maybe for smaller hosts, maybe it's more helpful, but it just seems like we're constantly in this battle, like we were just talking about. It's not a partnership. It's like this is what we're doing, and you're going to deal with it, kind of thing.
It's called a dictatorship.
It's called dictatorship, yeah. But I think the if I take kind of like my emotions out of it and my like initial kind of like visceral reactions to these changes, I think that it's the solution is like you can control the things you can control. So for example, at Track, they're like, okay, here are new features that we're gonna do because like this is the thing that's happening. And and we're going to help try to educate our partners and make sure that, we have a solution for what they need. And I think that's really the only way forward. And I know that there's other software, any PMS out there is either if they've already done this or they're probably working on it because they're not going to go to Airbnb and be like, hey, people are throwing a temper tantrum. Can you please undo this? So, yeah, I think I could admit that I just have like, a knee-jerk reaction now. Anytime I see like Airbnb updates, I just like automatically think it's going to make my life harder. And this like I think that I can, when I take a step back, I can, cooler heads prevail, and like how do we go forward and have a solution.
For sure. And my thinking is, Airbnb, especially in the short-term rental sector of hospitality, they've built such a big ecosystem. Not that there isn't an ecosystem around hospitality in general. Hotels obviously have a very similar ecosystem, and I'm sure for the hotels that list on Airbnb that are on Booking, like when I was a hotel manager in 2018 and 19, there was no, like, it wasn't new to get a fraud booking or a declined, a fraud credit card and a sketchy guest every now and then. Even on Airbnb, we've had a couple. So like, these aren't new things, but with companies that have built such a big ecosystem like this of tech and vendors, and obviously there's like what article of 250 companies in the tech space of just short-term rentals that are featured basically around Airbnb. And this post, just reading it from Dennis's perspective, email is such an important thing for us, whether I think once you get past a certain inventory count, obviously, you can do a lot on the app itself or in the website. But once you start integrating these softwares, it does become important. Like email is still a big part of, at least for our Vrbo communication. A lot of our guests, that's how they communicate post booking is email, and not to be able to have that, with whether it's an auto host link or a contract or maybe something involving insurance, that's a part of our job. That's how we secure owners. That's how we secure our properties. That's how we secure our teams. Like, it just is, to me, just can't believe that it's such a, like, we're just making a little change. It's just a little change, and yeah, it's going to impact so many different things in that ecosystem. So I'm glad that, seeing, I think his name is Patrick Power, super cool last name, saying he's already built and testing triggers and automations for reservation documents, and e-sign documents are compatible. They're doing the beta through TravelNet and Track software right now. Clients should be able to adopt it before this change happens. So my kind of like final comment on this topic is more of, I love our industry from the hotel side and the STR side on how adaptable we are with all this stuff, with the false data, with the booking.com fraud, with the, the Airbnb feature changes. Like, it's just super cool from a community and a collective standpoint to see how proactive we can be. And even if it sucks in the beginning, at the end of the day, like, it's super cool just to see everyone come together.
And
so that's my
it's funny to see how different the OTAs approach things too. Airbnb does this, taking away basically any direct comms with guests, and Vrbo says, they're your guest after the first stay. It's up to you to keep them, and otherwise they're going to come back to us and book another place on their next vacation. And it's just so night and day for, I've heard Tim say that 10 times. So it's definitely kind of a oil and water type of situation.
Although if I'm being honest, the way that Airbnb does it, where they control all of that, where it's their guest, if I was Airbnb, I'd probably be doing the same thing. So, it's like I can have my operator hat, and then there's just like, then your actual business hat, and you're like, yeah, that makes the most sense. They want to control the guest at all times. But I think that you run into the friction where they're not the supplier. Like, it's not their guest.
The thing is, over time, those relationships, the supply, if people will shift away from Airbnb and onto Vrbo over time, because on Vrbo you get to own the guest. That's the bet Vrbo's making, right? And we'll see if it's a win. I love the approach. It is more partner focused and kind of balanced on both sides, because the guests, this is right out of Airbnb's playbook. The guests want to talk with the host too, and it benefits them knowing and being able to converse back and forth, especially if you're traveling in group and I'm the only point of contact and I don't have contact information through Airbnb of the guest or host, or I'm on an airplane. There are benefits to having contact on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the only time we really see fraud, not that Airbnb probably doesn't have fraud bookings and stuff like that, but the side we see the most, at least in the press, on fraud with Airbnb is on the supplier side. Fake listings being created, fake, hosts accounts, all this stuff. So, again, there's, as Michael, you just said, there's perks and downfalls, pros and cons for both of these. So, I'm going to put this out there for our listeners. This is a call to action for you guys listening. A great opportunity for us to open up the hospitality hotline again. If you have thoughts on all of this stuff, from data being false and going viral to then being corrected, from fraud bookings to then, all the stuff with features being changed on any OTA, anything we've covered today, let us know your thoughts. Chime in. We want to hear from you. So the call to action is give us your best input or a different perspective that we haven't heard from the three of us today. I would love to get it on air and obviously let you get your 90 seconds of fame. So Hospitality Hotline, link in the show notes. That's my call to action. That's my final shout out. anything upcoming for you guys for 4th of July? What are you guys doing? Anything fun? Hopefully you guys are getting to take some time off, but would love to hear what
Well,
you're doing.
I was supposed to be in Indiana right now,
Yeah.
and my flight at 6 this morning was delayed, and so I'm leaving now at 9 p.m. So hopefully I'm in Indiana when you are all listening to this next week, and seeing my dad's side of the family. And I just wanted to give a quick plug to the Romy leadership team. We just had our quarterly meeting this last week, and they're the best team. I could not imagine doing my job with anybody else, and it sounds really maybe cheesy and cliche, but I really think there is no better team out there. So shout out to you guys. You're the best.
I can say the same about this Good Morning Hospitality team, but no big deal. It's
Mhm.
kind of cheesy. We already had those moments after scale, you know.
Yeah.
What about you,
all
Michael?
feels.
What's going on? All the feels.
Yeah, just taking the family up to Atlanta, see my folks, and go to fireworks and air show and all of that. So should be fun.
Love it.
Awesome.
What about you, Will?
Love it. I'm hanging out with friends. I'm taking 4 days off. I got Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday off.
Nice.
So
Wow.
that'll be a first for
Good.
me. Even when I was in North Carolina, I didn't take that much time off. So it'll be nice to hopefully enjoy some good Denver weather without some crazy rain and flooding that we've had the last few days. So yeah, that's about it. But excited for this episode. This was a fun one. We came in a little bit prepped and planned, so it was actually nice to have like a bullet point.
I got to rant.
Yeah, Brandy got all of her rants out. It's great. So yeah, thank you guys again for doing this pre-recording, and then for all of our listeners, thank you for tuning into the show. To our sponsors, thank you for supporting us to bring this content to the airwaves, and of course, like always, see you guys again next week.